Pou hihiri, pou rarama, pou o te whakaaro, pou o te tangata, pou o te aroha, te pou e haere nei i a tātou, mauri ora ki a tātou, haumie, huie, tā i kie. Mai ngā Wairarapa o te karu o te ika Māui, ki te tāpere nui o whātonga, ko taku aro ki ngā pai maunga o tararua ko o ku tapua e ki rangi whakaomauma. Ko rangi tāne ko Ngāti kahungunu ngā iwi, nau mai, hoki mai, nau mai haere mai ki Kahurangi. O tātou reo, o tātou kōrero, ko Wairarapa tēnei. May clarity be yours, may understanding be yours, through reflection, through personal endeavour, through respect. The virtues which bind us as one, may we be filled with well-being, bound together, unified, was our karakia this morning. Welcome and welcome back to Kahurangi, our people, our stories, our place. This is Te Ataahia Hurihanganui and I'm here on Arrow FM, our Kahurangi program which runs every Friday from 10:45 a.m. And it's a real pleasure to be back in the studio again this week for our third episode of 2022. Ko tēnei te paraire, te tekau waru o pe puere. Ara, ko te marama ko rākau mātohi, ko takiro rānei o hui tānguru. If you're new and this is your first time listening in, it's a really nice kind of place to start with our karakia as it kind of settles us into this space together. Some of you are going to be watching this, some of you are going to be listening live, some might be coming back in later. So if that's you, you can find us on the Arrow FM Facebook page or of course on the website where you can click into Kahurangi under the programs tab and you will find all episodes saved as a podcast. I'm here to hold space for our two mana whenua of Wairarapa, Rangitāne e Ngāti Kahungunu, and we do all things te reo Māori, te ao Māori, but especially highlighting and acknowledging our kahurangi. Kahurangi, our prized treasures, our most honourable people, things, stories that belong to us here in our wonderful region, our lovely home, Wairarapa. Now, if you were with us in episode 2, we started looking at some context and layering some information and some stories in regards to and in relation to Te Tiriti o Waitangi, of course following our very significant commemorations on the 6th Treaty of Waitangi Day and our public holiday. This will continue today, and I have got some resources that I'd love to share, I'd like to read from, in lieu of an event that was supposed to be taking place this weekend that I know many of you were interested in and connected with, an event that I was organising with Toi Pōneke in Wellington and Engaging Well Limited. Our Imagining Decolonisation wānanga has not been cancelled, but it has been postponed, unfortunately, under the current circumstances with of course, the rise in COVID cases. So apologies to those of you who were wanting to come along and for any inconvenience that a postponement is going to cause. Please bear in mind we are working very hard behind the scenes to make sure the event still comes to you in all of its glory, with all of the contributors we were hoping to have in a few weeks' time. So look out for comms either on the Toi Pōneke website, on their social media pages, or of course via my social media pages, Reo Rua. Now, as always, we start with a bit of a maramataka reading. And some of you may have noticed the last couple of moons have been really big, really bright, quite clear to the eye and closer, therefore, large. And of course, we're in our rākau nui period following the rise of Ohua a few nights ago. Now, Ohua is our fertility moon. She starts to get a bit more rounded in her shape. And then, of course, rākau nui is our full moon, which you would have seen 2 nights ago now. Last night was Rākau Mātohi, and we'll be transitioning into Takiro today at some time. The moon is still big. The full energy of the full moon is still around. So you are going to feel, hopefully, high energy in a good way. But of course, remembering that the Rākau Nui energy is sometimes an enhancement of any emotions that are going on. So if you're feeling, particularly sad, you might feel quite heavy with that sadness today and tomorrow. If you're feeling joyous and happy, you might be quite ecstatic, maybe full of beans, quite hypo. A lot of us might feel a little bit sleepless at nights during a Rākau Nui period, and that's very normal. Because of that high energy, our bodies are wanting to get productive because, of course, nature around us is doing that, and we're all interconnected. So take the time to be productive, to get your things done. You're working with the energy and not against it, so that's always a nice thing to think about. It's also a really good time to be in nature because, of course, like I said, nature is already doing all of these things. So if you're wanting to garden, plant, get your garden looking nice, your lawn's mowed, whatever, this is a really good time to do it. And of course, it's a weekend, so for those of us who do work the 9 to 5, we've got the time and the space to do it. And of course, the weather is playing ball as well. Now, I'm really mindful of the kind of heaviness that's in the air at the moment. We're 3 years into a COVID climate, and it's not an easy lifestyle. It's totally unprecedented. We're all in this together, and I know people have been struggling. So hopefully today we'll have just a bit of context to some of the possible conversations you're already having with whānau and with friends around the political landscape, the social landscape in Aotearoa at the moment. Of course, the protest in Wellington is very much on our minds, whether we want it to be or not. So today's all about continuing our conversation from episode 2, developing a bit more of an understanding around those founding documents of Aotearoa, our kind of shared identity, our home here on this land, and a bit more about Te Tiriti. And I'm going to reference a few really awesome resources that we can all have access to, whether that's going online or visiting a library, or of course going to available training that is accessible to most people anywhere and everywhere in Aotearoa. So that's what we're going to be talking about today, but let's just head over to a waiata break and we'll come into the kōrero in a couple of minutes' time. Tēnā tātou.
Pale, 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 politician. Can you make a right decision for all of us? For all of us. Pale, 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 politician. Can you make a right decision for all of us? Yeah, for all of us. Pale, 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 politician. Can you make a right decision for all of us? Yeah, for all of us. You can talk the talk, but will you walk the walk? Will you bring us comfort? Will you bring decision for all of us, for all of us. Politician, can you make a right decision for all of us? Yeah, for all of us. You can talk the talk, but will you walk the walk? Will you bring us comfort? Will you bring us comfort? You can talk the talk, but will you walk the walk? Will you bring us comfort? Will you bring us comfort? Oh, politician, can you make a right decision for all of us? For all of us. Politician, can you make a right decision for all of us? Yeah, for all of us. Politician, can you make a right decision? Oh, can you hear me, Mr. Politician? You can talk the talk, but will you walk the walk? Or will you bring us comfort? Will you bring us comfort? You can talk the talk, but will you walk the walk? Or will you bring us comfort? Will you bring us comfort? Oh, politician, can you make a right decision for all of us? For all of us. Politician, can you make a right decision for all of us? Yeah, for all of us. Politician, can you make a right decision for all of us? Yeah, for all of us. Politician, can you make a right decision?
Tough times for everyone. Let's just remember, however, at the end of the day, that we are all human. This is Te Ataahia on Kahurangi, and you're here for episode 3, 2022. We've just had our Maramataka reading, and we're going into some recap from last week, the context around Te Tiriti. Before we do that, however, I do want to reference the resource that I am going to be reading from today. If you are watching, you will see the booklet that I'm holding, which is accessible to all of us, and I can put the details on my page later if that's something you're wanting to get your hands on. Network Waitangi is a non-governmental organisation, NGO, which evolved from Project Waitangi. Project Waitangi was launched in 1986 to raise awareness of the treaty among non-Māori. Then Governor-General Sir Paul Reeves was its patron. The network now links regional groups of independent, mainly non-Māori educators, and through educational workshops, study groups, resource material, public seminars and submissions, they assist Pākehā and other tauiwi as tangata tiriti, people of the treaty, to honour their treaty responsibilities. So there are a number of people who have contributed to this particular resource that I'm reading from today, and I have actually mentioned them in past sessions, including last week. So hopefully you are following along, and this is part 2 of a conversation that we've already started around the landscape here in Aotearoa pre-European arrival. and around the very early kind of race relations and race relationships between Māori and Pākehā before the signing of the treaty in 1840. Now, this conversation today is going to continue some of that, and so we're going to recap some of the kōrero from last week, starting with what contact was there between Māori and Pākehā before 1840. Anei te kōrero. By the time the treaty was signed in 1840, British and Māori were no strangers to each other. The visitors found a highly developed, sustainable civilization in which autonomous tribes, or hapu, operated their own systems of health, education, justice, welfare, and spirituality. Hapu practiced a particular relationship with each other, the land and environment, and all was interwoven by a common language. After the European explorers, like Abel Tasman in 1642, James Cook in 1769, and John de Surville in 1769, British and American sealers and whalers became active in this region of the Pacific. By 1800, about 50 whalers and sealers were living here, mainly on offshore islands. After 1800, contact became more regular, with Māori supplying visiting ships with fresh water, fish and meat, kumara, flax, harakeke, and logs to make ships' masts. Hapu in the north and elsewhere established large commercial trading gardens to supply European ships with potatoes and vegetables. In return, Europeans offered metal tools and nails, new crops, and wool blankets. Māori and Europeans each expanded their commercial activities such as timber, harakeke, whaling stations, shipbuilding, and general trading in the mid-1820s. By this time, some traders were invited to live in Māori settlements under the protection of the rangatira, leaders, and marry Māori women. Now, side note here, if you are wanting to know about the rangatira or rangatiratanga structure and system, you might want to play back a couple of episodes ago, one of our very last episodes of last year. We looked at our Auntie Mara Matuta, our Kahurangi from here, and her research into rangatiratanga and the 8 attributes of a rangatira. I continue. They became permanent residents in a number of coastal areas. Other Europeans arriving at this time to live among Māori were runaway convicts, with estimates of 100 to 200 per year arriving in the 1820s and 1830s. All were expected to follow Māori laws and respect the hapu and their rangatira. Next came the missionaries and their families. A northern rangatira, Ruatara, invited Samuel Marsden to establish the first base of the Church Missionary Society, Anglican, in the Bay of Islands in 1814. The Wesleyans, Methodists, followed in 1822, and the Catholics in 1838. Missionaries set up schools to teach literacy, English literacy, may I add, and Christian teachings, as well as cultivation of European crops. While missionaries were heavily involved in trading and gardening activities, the actual rate of conversion to Christian practices and beliefs was slow. Literacy, however, was quickly adopted, and by 1840, more Māori than Pākehā per capita were literate in their own language. I'm going to repeat that because this is one of those myths, or a myth buster, if you like, that I quite enjoy stressing in language classes. So, here we go again. Literacy, however, was quickly adopted, and by 1840, more Māori than Pākehā per capita were literate in their own language. Māori economic development expanded rapidly from the 1820s, including commercial gardening and farming, and a shipbuilding industry. Hapu bought ships and commissioned shipbuilding to create an intercoastal and trans-Tasman transport network exporting wheat, potatoes, and butter. Agriculture flourished through to the 1850s, with Māori exporting to Australia and other countries around the Pacific. Māori also travelled overseas on diplomatic missions to European leaders and as sailors on whalers and others' ships. It is estimated that by 1840, 1,000 Māori had travelled overseas and returned to describe their experiences. Although most European visitors in this early contact period were transients, there were approximately 2,000 permanent settlers here by 1839, mostly in the far north, and estimates of the Māori population vary between 150,000 and 200,000. Pretty awesome reading, eh? So again, it's a snapshot, and the resource is structured in a way that's quite user-friendly in that there are main questions in bold, which are numbered throughout, and a kind of short paragraph or maybe a one-page answer. So we're going to continue to again recap last week. We'll have a break and then we'll continue with our te tiriti wording, which we promised last week. What were early relationships like between Māori and Pākehā? Page 8. Often good and mutually beneficial. Just as Europeans were keen to trade with Māori, Māori were very interested in new technologies and crops. Hapu would make arrangements for a European to live with them to facilitate relationships. Hapu were used to making alliances with each other for mutually beneficial purposes, such as care of the environment, fishing expeditions, higher education, large gardens, and defence. They saw the European newcomers as a hapu hou, a new hapu, with whom to enhance advantageous relationships. Making treaties to formalise and protect such alliances was also common, with important treaties considered to be tatau pounamu, or sacred covenants, binding on generations to come. Māori leaders, rangatira, worked for the benefit of their hapu by building relationships with European leaders such as governors of the British colony in Sydney, the royal family in Britain, and ambassadors and church leaders from other countries. From 1805, a rangatira regularly took the initiative to visit the governors in Sydney and from time to time the British royalty in London. What other countries were interested in New Zealand? British interests in the area were certainly the strongest, but American and French activity was increasing. The Americans appointed a consul to New Zealand in 1839, 1 year before the treaty. They had many trade interests and had been making treaties in the Pacific since 1826. Now, I'm just going to skip ahead a little bit because we've done a little bit of this kōrero last week. But I do want to go straight to question number 5 on page 9. And this is for those of you who weren't with us last week. We looked into Te Wakaminenga and our Declaration of Independence. And then we'll head to a break, okay? Tātou mā, hopefully you're following along. What was Te Wakaminenga, the Confederation of Chiefs? Page 9. Stimulated by the rangatira Te Puhi, northern leaders began meeting from about 1808 in formal assembly to agree on law and policy concerning the newcomers. This assembly was called Te Wakaminenga o ngā Hapu o Nutireni, the General Assembly of the Tribal Nations. The assembly had a general secretary, Waikato. He and the renowned Ngāpuhi leader Hongi Hika went to meet King George of Britain in 1820 under Te Wakaminenga. In the years leading up the declaration and the treaty, the meetings of Te Wakaminenga were attended and supported by many key leaders from around Te Ika a Maui, North Island, and gatherings continued well after the treaty was signed. The flag chosen by the northern leaders in 1834 was known as the Te Wakaminenga flag, and I know some of you have seen this in recent days, if not hours, probably either on social media or our mainstream media, or if you're in Wellington at the moment. And now you've got a bit of context to that flag and where it's come from, if it's the first time maybe you're viewing it, or if you've always wondered what, of course, it represented or represents today. The flag chosen by the northern leaders in 1834 was known as the Te Wakaminenga flag and known to the British as the Confederation of Chiefs flag. I'm going to skip to this last bit here and then we'll go to our wonderful waiata just to kind of break up our session today. What is the Declaration of Independence? page 10. The Declaration of Independence, more correctly, He Wakaputanga o Te Rangatiratanga o Nutireni, is a Māori proclamation to the international world that this country was an independent state and that full sovereign power and authority, both mana and tino rangatiratanga, two very key words that we have explored together, resided in Rangatira and the hapu they represented. It was signed at Waitangi on the 28th of October 1835, 5 years before the Treaty of Waitangi, 5 years before Te Tiriti o Waitangi. The signatories were members of Te Wakaminenga, also known as the Confederation of Chiefs. 34 rangatira from the north signed the declaration at Waitangi. By 1840, there were 52 signatories. These included Te Wherowhero, leading Tainui rangatira from the Waikato, and Te Hapuku of Ngāti Kahungunu here in our area, and specifically in the Hawke's Bay. There's also evidence that the declaration was signed by Te Heuheu, influential tūwhare toa ariki, or major leader, from the central North Island, and as late as 1890 by 40 rangatira at Hauraki. In reaching an agreement about the declaration, the rangatira took advice from James Busby and the merchant James Clendon, who was later to become the United States consul. Busby was troubled by reports that the Frenchman de Terry, I'm not very good with my French, I apologise if that's mispronounced, was claiming he'd bought a large amount of land in Hokianga and planned to come to New Zealand to set himself up as a sovereign, i.e. as a French sovereign. The rangatira concerns were broader than this, however. They wished to establish their authority in the eyes of the international world and further their expanding trading interests. The rangatira also wanted to advance their ties of friendship with the British monarchs, with whom a mutually advantageous relationship was growing. The Crown was invited to ensure that others did not infringe the independence of the hapu, especially as the rangatira and their hapu were showing friendship and care to the Pākehā living on their lands. Importantly, the declaration made it clear that no separate legislative authority or kāwanatanga would be allowed in the country except as appointed and directed by Te Wakaminenga, that is the Confederation. Busby forwarded the Declaration of Britain, which formally recognised New Zealand's sovereign independence in 1836, 4 years before the signing of the Treaty of Waitangi. This sovereign independence was also recognised by France and the United States of America. I'm going to stop there. There's a little bit more in the resource, but again, it's just to catch you all up. A bit of beautiful context, and we spoke last week about the importance of the keywords whānau, hapu, and iwi, using the root words from a Māori perspective, or from Te Ao Māori, where those words come from, and how they have had to change and be adapted over time with different translations using possibly broader cultural contexts, and also their importance in regards to and in connection to our two founding documents, the Declaration of Independence, which we've just heard about, and how critical it is that we all know about that and what it was all about and who signed it and why and how it came to be, but also how it precedes the Te Tiriti o Waitangi that many of us have been talking about, particularly in the last couple of weeks. So we're going to head to our break now. And when we come back, we will continue with a bit of kōrero about Te Tiriti o Waitangi, our second, if you like, founding document. Anei a Trinity Roots, me tō mātou me ki, me tō tātou kahurangi a Warren Maxwell, Homeland and Sea. Kia ora.
this world want a piece of this, yeah. Ooh, seems like nothing, no, is gonna stop it. I know it, can feel it. Ooh, and out they all say Queen Bee with a company of warriors, not warriors. Put your people against numbers, 'cause there ain't no souls, just empty words and some extra notes at the end of it. And oh, Queen Bee should know. She can't see her flowers. Changing, I'll be if I'm gonna play that game. Paid my dues, was there on time. You give me them blues, and now they all say Queen Bee with a company of warriors, not warriors. Yeah. Put your people against numbers, 'cause there ain't no souls, just empty words and some extra notes at the end of it. And oh, Queen Bee should know. She can't see her flowers.
Down one of my favourite songs in the whole wide world, our lovely Kahurangi, Warren Maxwell, Trinity Roots, and the beautiful voice of Holly Smith there in the background. Homeland and Sea. Nau mai hoki mai ki Kahurangi ko Te Ataahia, tēnei e karangate ake kia koutou e whakarongo mai nei. I tēnei rā a tāhua, tēnei rā paki, te paraire, rua mano rua tikoma rua, te wahanga tua toru, o tēnei nā kahurangi o tātou. So we're talking about te tiriti. We have just spoken about the recap, looking at those beautiful relationships between our Māori tūpuna and our Pākehā o Tawiwi ancestors in the early days, prelude to Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and we've just arrived at the point where we're going to speak about Te Tiriti in detail and maybe the differences between those articles that we started talking about at the end of episode 2. So what is the Treaty of Waitangi? A treaty is a legally binding international instrument agreed to and signed by two or more sovereign nations. All parties to a treaty are required to abide by its provisions unless they abrogate, formally withdraw from it. And I probably said that wrong too. The Treaty of Waitangi is thus an agreement which forms a contract or covenant between the Crown and Māori hapu through their rangatira. It was signed on February the 6th, 1840, as we know, by 40 rangatira on behalf of their hapu and Captain Hobson representing Queen Victoria at the time, or the monarchy. Copies of the treaty were taken around the country and eventually more than 500 Māori leaders signed. Now, this is the part most of us know, and hopefully as we get through some of the detail, you might be learning something new or relearning something, if you like, myth-busting, I like to call it. The treaty text signed at Waitangi was in Māori and called Te Tiriti o Waitangi. It recognised the authority and rights of Māori as set out in the Declaration of Independence, which we've just spoken about. It allowed for the peaceful acquisition of land that Māori wished to make available and was directed towards ensuring peace and good order as more immigrants came to settle here. Through Te Tiriti, Māori agreed to the appointment of a governor in order to control British settlers' behaviour and regulate their settlement. Thus, in Te Tiriti, the Queen agreed to arrange governorship over Pākehā who were living here outside British law. Māori were not looking to the Crown to exercise governorship over themselves, as they had their own long-established systems of government and law. The Crown guaranteed it would uphold Māori authority and sovereignty. And this is that key word again, tino rangatiratanga, in the context of Te Tiriti. Now, tino rangatiratanga was guaranteed over their lands, villages, and everything else they treasured, taonga, and accorded Māori the same rights as British people. It also protected religious freedoms. Who wrote Te Tiriti o Waitangi? Captain William Hobson brought written instructions from the Colonial Secretary, Lord Normanby. James Busby, the British resident, and Hobson's secretary, Freeman, did the actual drafting from those instructions. And if you're wanting to see this play out in a visual, because listening to me read it is not connecting, maybe you need a bit more detail, then please head over to the Waitangi Grounds website. I highly recommend their YouTube clips, which are also saved onto YouTube. And it's a really short series of about 6 videos that have these wonderful actors act this entire scene out, the drafting, the editing, the translating, and then the signing of the treaty. Highly recommend that. Let's go back to our reading. The English language draft was then translated into Māori by the Reverend Henry Williams, a missionary who had been here for over 20 years, and his son Edward. It was the Māori text, Te Tiriti o Waitangi, that was signed by the rangatira and Hobson at Waitangi. There are 8 known English language texts or draft texts dated 5th or 6th of February 1840, with minor differences between them. This English language version is now referred to as the Crown's English language version because it came to be by the Crown as the treaty. However, it differs significantly from Te Tiriti o Waitangi and is not the treaty agreed to by the rangatira. Really important, really important that we understand that. The majority of the rangatira around the country signed Te Tiriti o Waitangi, the original settled Te Reo Māori version. That last bit was my addition to the kōrero. Now, like I said last week, I did promise to bring in a bit of a copy of this, and I'm going to try and save this electronically to my Facebook page, Reo Rua, if you're wanting to see it. It's a wonderful summary of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, but in plain English for those of us who don't speak reo. Now, let's just remember the structure of our Treaty of Waitangi, or Te Tiriti o Waitangi. There are actually 4 parts, including a preamble. So that's kind of 5 sections in total, if you like. The preamble, or sometimes we call it the introduction, Article 1, Article 2, Article 3, and there's actually a 4th article in Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and it's a spoken part. I'm going to read them now in plain English using the form I'd love to share with everyone if I can. And please bear with me with my communications at the moment. I have been home with a sick darling for the last week, so I haven't been putting things on my Facebook, but I will from today onwards. But you can hear what is being promised, knowing that our rangatira Māori signed this version on Waitangi Day at Waitangi. Anei, a summary of Te Tiriti o Waitangi in plain English. Introduction. The Queen wants Māori people to keep their lands and independence, and she wants all peoples to live together in peace. This agreement is to make a government for her people who are now in New Zealand and for those who will come in the future. Article 1, or the first. Māori give to the Queen of England the right to have a governor in New Zealand. The second. The Queen agrees that Māori keep their independence and keep control over their lands and everything that is important to them. They give to the Queen the right to buy land if they want to sell it. The third. The Queen gives Māori people the same rights as British people. And the fourth, the spoken promise. Often not referred to at all when we're speaking about the Treaty of Waitangi, the English version. Here it is here. The governor promises to protect Māori customs and the different religions in New Zealand. I'm just going to let you sit on that for a little while. We might need to digest it a bit, and we'll have another waiata soon to shake it all off, because sometimes learning or relearning something as important as this can set off all sorts of emotions in us. So we'll have a bit of a waiata break soon, and a bit of a kanikani and a bit of a shake off as well. But yeah, so hopefully you're kind of understanding where many of our conflicts to this day come from and arise, and why we need to continue dialogue and conversation about this. And really this is just a heads up. It's education, it's knowledge. Going back to last week's whakatauki, the more we know, the more we do. And we are powerful if we can unite in the uncomfortable of those conversations needed. Now, the language of the treaty is important because certain people signed one version and certain people signed the other. The government or the Crown have recognised one version and not the other, etc., etc. So just as a summary or recap on those differences, the next part to the form that I'm wanting to share with you all, if I can, somehow. I'm holding it up to those of you who are watching. It's called The Language of the Treaty, and it comes from the same collation of resources and materials of particularly Pākehā and Tiriti, tangata Tiriti, educators in this space. And again, please check out the names of reference, because they're wonderful men and women who have been working in this space for decades as allies to Māori, trying to again share this knowledge with anyone and everyone. Te Tiriti o Waitangi Article 1 states, Māori give the Queen of England the right to have a governor in Aotearoa, New Zealand. The English version in the same Article 1 states Māori give to the Queen control over Aotearoa, New Zealand. Quite different, eh? So one stating the right to have a governor here, and the other version is stating control over all Aotearoa. So you can start to see very quickly where there are discrepancies. And this is certainly what we do when we're studying Te Tiriti. Hopefully we'll be starting from an earlier age as generations come through. Article 2 in Te Tiriti, the Māori version, states the Queen agrees that Māori keep their independence and keep control over their lands and everything that is important to them. They give the Queen the right to buy land if they want to sell it. We've just read that, but let's compare that to the English version. Article 2. The Queen guarantees all Māori rights to land, forests and fishing. If Māori want to sell land, they can only sell it to the Queen. So very similar. So it's got a similar tone, thankfully, but the wording's slightly different, yeah? In Article 3 of Te Tiriti o Waitangi, Te Reo Māori version, the Queen gives Māori the same rights as British people, and in the English version, the Queen gives Māori the same rights as British people. Oh, hallelujah. That's almost word for word the same. And then we have in Te Tiriti o Waitangi, as we've just read out, and I won't repeat it, the spoken promise, which doesn't actually occur or repeat itself in the English version whatsoever. So the main question really, and this is the challenge that we often put out to participants in tiriti education, is which treaty? The treaty in Māori, it's signed by 512 Māori and by the British Governor on behalf of the Queen. It's recognised in international law, and this treaty maintains Māori authority in Aotearoa, New Zealand. The treaty in English, however, is signed by 39 Māori in comparison. This is the treaty that Captain Hobson wanted, recognised by the New Zealand government, and this treaty gives control to the Crown only. What do? We keep pushing through, tātou mā. The more we know, the more we do. Let's just keep learning, and hopefully we'll find some compromise at one point in time. Ka whawhai tonu tātou. We're going to head over to another break and then a bit of a Q&A session before we start to conclude our session for today on Te Tiriti. But please, if you've got any questions, if this kōrero has spurred anything inside of you and you're wanting to engage in the dialogue and conversation, I'm very openly inviting you into. You can contact me directly either through the contacts page on www.reorua.co.nz, on my Reorua Facebook page, or via Arrow FM channels on social media or their website. I'm really, really open to conversation, but of course, please bear in mind, I am not a tiriti educator or expert. I do, however, have my hands on lots of wonderful resources and materials I can maybe refer on to you and share with you. And it's certainly where I'm getting a lot of my information from too. So, tēnā tātou e te motu. Let's have a bit of a break. This next waiata is called Maranga Ake Ai by Aotearoa. Kia ora.
Maranga Ake Ai. There's a movement on the street. People moving, they shuffle to the beat. I hear them talking on the street.
Maranga ake ai na Aotearoa tēnei waiata rawerawa atu. Nau mai hoki mai ki Kahurangi ko Te Ataahia tēnei. So this is a question I get all the time in te reo classes, te ao Māori classes, te reti education, workshops that I sometimes run. How can a document signed in 1840 have relevance today? And I love this answer provided by our wonderful network Waitangi, and I'm holding the book up again so you can kind of see what it looks like for those of you who are hopefully running out the door. I'm trying to find it. There it is there. This is on page 23. How can a document signed in 1840 have any relevance for today? Well, here's their answer, which I totally resonate with. Just because something is old doesn't mean it isn't relevant. Some of our New Zealand laws are based on the Magna Carta, first signed in 1215. Hello. The treaty has been described as a living document whose basic principles can be applied to any age. In the 1987 Māori Council Court case against the Crown, the 5 Pākehā Court of Appeal judges talked for the first time about positive approaches to the treaty for today's world. The parties to the treaty, the Crown and Māori iwi, entered into a solemn commitment based on justice and the recognition of Māori as the prior inhabitants of this country, Aotearoa, New Zealand. History shows that this commitment has not been honoured by the Crown. In 1975, the Waitangi Tribunal was established. Although it seems to have been established principally to allay rising Māori protest of the time, it has had a key role in applying the treaty to what is happening in the country today. In the Muri Whenua Fishing Report of June 1988, for example, the tribunal spoke of the practical application of the treaty for the modern world. Quote, "Any impracticality today results not from the treaty, but from our failure to heed its terms. The important point is that there was and still is room for an agreement to be made." Unquote. Had the treaty been honoured from the time it was signed, this country would be a very different place today. Until recently, non-Māori have not had to face the implications of the treaty. Most did not know about the Treaty of Waitangi until television brought the accusations of the young Māori activists of Ngā Tamatua and others directly to us in the 1970s. It is said of the treaty that while Māori never forgot, non-Māori never knew. In the past 30 years or so, we have been challenged also to view our colonial history from a Māori perspective and re-examine the idea that New Zealand ever had, quote, the best race relations in the world, unquote. Some non-Māori are fearful of this change in perception, wrongly believing that they may incur losses personally. Others are working to honour the treaty in positive ways, believing that it is the putting right of injustices that will bring a unified future. Many NGOs that have made a commitment to foster practical treaty relationships have found both Māori and non-Māori have gained from the process. We are only human. I'm going to play another song because I know this stirs up a bit of emotion. I'm Pākehā too, and I know what it's like to be told that we never knew. I'm Māori, and I know what it is to be reminded that we've always known. And we've had to kind of sit in patience and in our resilience to really get this knowledge across. But the more we talk, the more we know, the more we know, the more we do. We are only human.
And numb anesthetics kicked in. I want to sleep in. Are you a victim of creation? I'm fighting for the smallest sliver of hope, suffocating in the shadows. Understand
as I lay with the pieces on the floor. A silent cry slowly tearing me apart. Will I be able to survive?
I'm fighting for the smallest silver of hope, suffocated in the shadows, finding my head to breathe, to release the truth of me. Look into my eyes, I understand. I'm empathized. Together we'll stand. You don't have to hide. Just take my hand, because we are human.
We began as two peoples, agreeing to share one country for our mutual benefit. Since then, the treaty has been dishonoured by one party, the group which subsequently became more numerous and more powerful. The many calls for us to be one people need to be challenged, and often this really means, let's all speak English so I can understand what you're saying. What is a New Zealander now? Is he or she a person who speaks only English, who operates along only Pākehā cultural lines, who does not value or acknowledge Māori or other cultural values and skills? Many of those who talk about One New Zealand come from this position. On the other hand, many Māori and Tawiwi are able to operate in two worlds, speaking both their own language and English. As diversity in immigration creates an increasingly multi-ethnic nation, some people may find it more helpful to describe themselves as being from a particular culture, for example as a Chinese, Korean, Dutch, Pākehā, Dalmatian, Samoan or Tongan New Zealand. These groups will have their own particular history and stories to tell of what is to be shaped by their culture or combination of cultures, both outside and within our South Pacific nation. When we can truly celebrate cultural diversity, we may be better able to achieve unity as a nation, ko tahitanga. For this to be achieved, the particular indigenous status of tangata whenua must be recognised, and the status and responsibilities of tangata tiriti understood. A treaty-based approach requires more than provision of equal opportunity in the mainstream system. A treaty-based multi-ethnic future is one where the particular role of Māori culture is valued. Māori political, social and economic institutions are flourishing, and the needs of Māori are prioritised, while others' rights to cultural expression are also preserved. Tune in next week for part 3 of our kōrero. What can we do? What must we do? It's been an absolute pleasure being here with you all today. I'm going to finish with one more waiata, so please let the song run out before you go and have a bit of a kani and shake it all off. Anei te karakia whakamutunga. Whakairia ake te kōrero ki te pou tuārongo. Hei tiki anō, mō muri ake nei, kia wātea ai, kia tīna haumi e, hui e, tai ki e. Ko tēnei a Kahurangi, ko Te Ataahia Eraina tēnei, e mihi kauana kia koutou, katoa kia pai te wikini, hei tērā wiki, tēnā koutou, kia ora anō tātou katoa.
Sunshine on the water is still golden, though the water keeps on moving. And you would smile just as easily if you could see what I see. Wild and unruly is as worthy of attention as calm and undemanding. And you have my attention, not just now, but forever willingly. Oh, and what is is now familiar. When you go, we'll go with you. Hold on to the beauty that you know, and please remember to hold your head high. If you fall or falter, like sunshine on the water, you were golden, no matter where you are. They say love can move a mountain. Well, yours is here forever, waiting just to claim you. And you can climb as high as you must go to see the ocean meet the sky. Oh, and sometimes we are dreamers, now and then believers. Hold on to memory and hope, and please remember to hold your head high. If you fall or falter, like sunshine on the water, you were golden, no matter where you are.
Mauri ora.